All right.
Hello.
Hi.
I am Michael Brendan Dougherty here. Latest episode of Washington Squares with my good friend Daniel Strauss. Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Daniel Strauss. I write for the Hill newspaper, and I'm excited to be on Washington Squares.
Awesome. I forgot to mention I am politics editor at Business Insider, which is the office buzzing behind me. So it was a weird couple weeks of political news, and I haven't talked politics on the show for a couple weeks. Let's see. One of the things we wanted to hit on, I think, was the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is tomorrow night. This annual tradition where a decent comic, this year it's Jimmy Kimmel, and the president get up and make the Washington press corps feel even more important than they already do. And it brought something up to me because I was thinking about last year's White House Correspondents' Dinner. Now, full disclosure, I am not invited. I don't go. And until I'm invited, I'm going to say that I don't want to go. I'm totally above it, guys. I don't want to go to your big fancy party. Anyway, so last year...
like high school all over again for me.
Yeah. Well, last year, Obama performed very well. And, you know, he has Daily Show writers helping him out. He was very cool. It also happened to be shortly after he gave the order to kill bin Laden, and about 24 hours before the news broke out, and he gave a speech saying, "We did it, we killed bin Laden." And so I was thinking about this today, and I was thinking, man, our president is cool, as in cool-headed. In fact, I can't think of a single political figure as cool-headed as he is. I mean, Seth Meyers was even joking about, like, bin Laden, and Obama didn't even smirk. It was like, you know, I guess in the early days of the administration, they talked about how he sort of has this Vulcan mind. You know, emotion doesn't trouble Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk about this distinction between his cool-headedness and his coolness, as in he appeared on Late Night with Fallon this week, and you know, delivered his slow jam of the news. And Republicans and conservatives have been saying, "Ugh, you know, Obama just thinks he's so cool," and we're back to, you know, the showman now that we're getting towards the campaign season.
Right.
So, do you have any comments on his coolness?
Yeah, but I want to go back. I want to also, you know, recall that, you know, this was also around the time that Donald Trump was, you know, the standard bearer for the birther movement. So, you know, Obama didn't, like, crack a smile or anything, but that we know, but, like, he could have easily diverted that to, you know, his constant ribbing on Trump, which he did, like, relentlessly at the Correspondents' Dinner last year. And, you know, it did distract, but you're right. He was so... He was the opposite of, like, visibly cheerful or, you know, how anyone would be around that time, having just got, you know, America's number one enemy.
Or nervous, or, you know, because it still seems a little unclear the timing of it, but
yeah,
it's amazing, actually. It's his cool-headedness is so distinctive. I actually cannot think of a living politician that has it.
Right.
You know, supposedly, you know, the reputation is that Calvin Coolidge, hilariously named,
Yeah.
was also very cool-headed. about these things, and he's known for these like little witticisms.
Mm-hmm.
A woman is like, "Oh, I bet someone can get you to say more than 3 words," and he just turns to her and says, "You lose." But of course, Calvin Coolidge also had an electronic horse installed in the White House so he could ride it. So I don't know if he's that cool.
Well, yeah. What's interesting about it also in this coolness is that we hear about it a lot less these days than we did during the 2008 campaign, where today's sort of yellow style journalism was at its peak and like everything was a gate. And, we'd regularly hear how Obama was just calm and did not panic. But I think, the coolness it comes in many forms. It's because, at the same time, you could say that Rick Santorum actually was cool-headed in that for a lot of his campaign, he didn't freak out about how badly he was doing. And he ended up being sort of a last man standing candidate and gaining some momentum and appeal. And actually, I think you could say the same about Mitt Romney. When, John Huntsman entered the race, I was really interested to see if Romney was going to freak out, and the same thing with Rick Perry. And I didn't see any visible sweat on his part. He just seemed pretty much like, let's see where this goes. But Obama does have this sort of, I think what adds to the dual coolism with Obama is that he is also seen as, pretty cool in the sense that, he seems pretty appealing and, really sort of calm and someone attractive in the sense like you want to hang around with him because he seems happy and, not overly emotional.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would definitely say I agree with how Santorum handled his campaign, reflected a coolness, a cool-headedness, but he's one of the least cool-headed people as far as handling himself.
Right. Exactly.
Right? It's like you can actually tell there's almost like a physical manifestation of how bothered he gets at an idea he thinks is false.
Right.
And then he just literally can't stop responding to it. It was one of to screw up the use of the word even more, to me that was one of the cool things about him, was that Santorum just could never be political when there was a point of philosophy or theology at stake.
Right. He always got really emotional and really engaged in that. That's true. But what? Let me ask you something about this in the context of the Correspondence Center. Are you wondering, are we going to hear some new sort of bombshell right after?
No, I don't think so. I just think, I suppose it's just for me. I don't welcome another Obama term. Mm-hmm. I will be just as happy when it's over as I will be sad that Mitt Romney is becoming president. Right. Just in my pox and all their houses way. But I just felt like I needed to appreciate today that, and I hate the idea of the imperial presidency. I hate the idea of infusing so much personality into the office, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And that's one reason why I like Obama personally, is that a lot of times he withdraws his personality.
Right.
He's measured. But there's just something so badass about him doing well at the Correspondence Dinner last year, and then also giving the order to kill bin Laden, and then writing his own speech and delivering it right after the Mets-Phillies game.
Yeah.
And so it was just, I think it's a historical note that should not be forgotten. I mean, obviously the death of bin Laden will be remembered, but the way it was done was very cool. To me, in a sense, this Correspondence Dinner, even though it's much less dramatic in a sense. To me, that was Obama's bullhorn moment. You know, that weekend was sort of like, here is this guy doing what he does best, which is staying in control, on message, being just level-headed. I don't know. I was impressed.
Right. It's definitely something that Obama admirers have picked up on and really like to highlight. And the only other thing that really comes to mind on this is that Wyatt Cenac said in 2008, he's on the Daily Show, that he made this case that like Obama isn't funny, and I think there's actually sort of a case for that. He's not. I mean, he really likes when he can make audiences laugh, but no one really likes to say like he's especially funny on this. And I think that's one of the reasons that his coolness really stuck out at the Correspondents' Dinner, because we weren't expecting a huge amount of humor or some sort of type of humor out of Obama that he's really good at.
I'll be very curious.
Safe.
I'll be very curious to see how he does this year. It's going to be watched a little bit more intensely to see if he has the mojo, for election 2012.
Yeah.
But it brings up this other point, which is that, at least in my lifetime, I don't think we've had two cooler customers running for president at the same time. And there's something about both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama that is so accomplished. And what was interesting is I remember in New Hampshire last year, I went to a Mitt Romney speech before the Nashua Chamber of Commerce. And this was just days before the primary. And the big news out of that speech was that, he said, I like to fire people.
Yeah.
And everyone in the back of the room, all the media was like twittering that away, and that became the big takeaway.
Right.
Now, I had actually been up in the front of the room, kind of with the tables of people that were there, real, civilians, let's say. And no one noticed the I like to fire people line is unusual, because in context it made absolute sense.
Right.
And it was Romney at his absolute best as far as performance. And I think we saw that again earlier this week, where he kind of gave his sort of general election preview speech, where, and I thought the line was a little clunky about, it's still about the economy and we're not stupid.
Yeah.
The kind of rephrasing of James Carville's 1992, it's the economy, stupid line. But overall, I thought it was a really strong speech, and I come to this question. Is Mitt Romney underrated as a candidate now?
Yeah, it's a good question. But at the same time, he's going to win the nomination, so it can't be that underrated, right? But yeah, I think the support for that question is that everyone poo-poos him as unviable and too quick to change positions. But for someone who has had all these problems, has all these weaknesses, he's done pretty well. And he's stood up above the fray, and he's going to win the nomination now.
Right. And in the general, though, are we underrating his potential?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the Obama administration has never, or Obama's re-elect team has never, counted Romney out. They were, we had a story from our former White House reporter who went to Obama's re-elect headquarters in Chicago, and he noticed that they had, a calendar tracking 3 candidates at all time and making sure they knew where 3 candidates were. It was John Huntsman, Tim Pawlenty, and Mitt Romney. And we know what happened to the other 2.
Right.
But, for so long, the press has assumed that when Rick Perry jumps in, when Mitt Romney jumps in, when Rick Santorum has his surge, when Newt Gingrich has his surge, that Romney would be over, and he was just sort of a placeholder. But he hasn't been. He's survived all of this, and he's done very well in the primaries. So he can't actually be that bad of a candidate.
I think it's right. I think we've exaggerated how he lost in 2008, and I think the media, and it became a real bother to me. Not that I carry that much water for Romney. I just, just the honesty of the thing bothered me that on the night of the Southern primaries, there had been millions of votes cast, and Romney had won, we're talking millions more votes than Rick Santorum.
Right.
And then on the night of the Southern primaries, Santorum wins a couple states, but he'd only caught up on vote totals by about 30,000 votes. And people are talking as if, potentially this is going to sink Romney's candidacy. Now, I know we don't, the primary isn't done by popular vote, obviously, but that popular vote stance showed to me that the press was just repeatedly exaggerating Romney's weaknesses with base voters.
Right.
And, of course, we've seen in the past month every poll number among evangelicals and everyone else go in the right direction for Romney. And this isn't a surprise. There's always some faction of a party that prefers one candidate to another. There's still the Puma voters in 2008 who said they preferred Hillary Clinton. And now nearly every single one of them is a Barack Obama voter. Became one in 2008 and will be one in 2012. So I think Romney's victories actually were pretty impressive, given what he was arrayed against. And even if the candidates, some of them weren't great, there was enough of them and so much interest in taking him down as the front runner, he survived it.
I mean, we really just don't hear enough in the press, actually, which I guess I'm slightly, I think my impact is tiny, but we don't hear enough in the press what his strengths are. Whenever we talk about candidates' attributes, you're always going to hear Romney care, and I put air quotes around that, and, the same sort of 2 or 3 things. And on the other side, in the strengths column, it's usually like businessman. But at the same time, he was elected to this notoriously blue state. And he is a heavyweight in a time when, severe conservatism is in style. So he just can't, he is being underrated. And I think actually one of the best examples of this was the Hillary Rosen gate. Was that 3-4 weeks ago?
Yeah. Where
Rosen said this thing. She said, Ann Romney shouldn't be advising her husband on economic issues. What qualifications does she have? And the Romney camp pounced on it. And the beauty of this was how closely and how quickly they associated it with the Obama administration and Obama's reelect team. Because this woman was not closely associated with the administration and is a consultant, but through press releases and just statements, they hammered her, and the Democrats were on this horrible defense for the rest of the day, having to disavow this woman who, as far as I understand it, had visited the White House and worked with some of the the Obama admin people, but wasn't in there. And that's a really, really impressive sort of move by the Romney campaign. It's real for campaigning. It is what the masters do.
Yeah, it showed a sophistication of operations that was really impressive.
Yeah, go on. I don't want to interrupt you on this.
No, that's fine. I'll say this. I think we're in for a big... and I think there's also some interest in underrating Romney. For instance, there was Karl Rove put out his first electoral map yesterday, and he had Obama winning it pretty easily as things stand right now. And he had a lot of states that he marked as leaning Obama or only leaning Romney, and I looked at this map and I thought, oh man, does Karl Rove want Republican donors to open up their wallets? It was an interesting map, and it's whatever Karl Rove does, I guess now because of his legendary status as the Svengali of the Bush White House political team.
Yeah,
he is just inherently interesting. I'm thinking as an editor. Right now.
It definitely. You wouldn't expect him to release a map that says that.
You wouldn't expect it, but then I thought about it more, and it's like you would, because it's time to hit the buttons with all the donors, and Rove has an enormous political action committee that is raising a lot of money, and he probably wants to raise a lot more.
Right.
So,
well, let me ask you this then: do you think there is any correlation between Rove's map and John Boehner recently saying that there's a 1 in 3 chance that they'll lose the House?
I don't know if there's a correlation. It just seems that. I think there's a correlation in the sense of trying to excite donors and get people pumped up for 2012. I don't think. I doubt it was coordinated. I just think there's a mood among Republicans that, okay, we've taken a couple of weeks while Santorum has dropped out, and now Gingrich has made moves to drop out to catch our breath, and now's the time to start, a full court press on fundraising and kicking off the general election campaign.
Right.
So we'll see where it goes from there. Now, I wanted to talk about another speech this week.
Right, Marco Rubio's, and go on. But I wanted to say that I think is going to be, Rubio is going to be a big indicator for Romney in general.
Okay. Tell me more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I think it was John Dickerson wrote this piece in Slate recently that said that Rubio is this election cycle's Sarah Palin, and there's a lot in there that I want to mention. But one thing was that he said at the end that this is before November 4th, win or lose. Romney picking a vice presidential nominee is going to be his one real presidential decision. And I have, before Rubio gave this massive foreign policy speech, I thought it was a very bad idea for Romney to pick Rubio. But now I actually think it's a bad idea for Rubio to accept if Romney picked him as his VP also. I think it's a bad choice on both ends.
Okay, well, tell me more about that. Why would it be bad for Rubio?
So Rubio gave this speech at the Brookings Institute this week. And, he has, for a while now, he's been trying to highlight his foreign policy credentials and make that his signature issue. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. He weighs in on Libya. He weighs in on Haiti. These are big topics for him, and it's something his office has said really wants to, this is what they want to talk about. This is what he wants to be known for right now. Mm-hmm. So he gives this speech, and number one, visibly he doesn't go after Obama, which was smart, not only because, you don't want the press to be distracted with Rubio hitting him. We want to talk about what he's saying. But a lot of it was not direct criticism of Obama on foreign policy. It wasn't, it wasn't the normal criticism on Libya, which was it constitutional to go in there? Rubio's argument was that we should have gone in sooner. And
right.
It was a complex speech. This was not something basic. This was not, a stance, a foreign policy view that you can really sort of summarize in 2 or 3 sentences. There's a lot in there. And he also repeatedly cited his bipartisanship and Robert Kagan's writings, which is something that Obama has actually highlighted.
Right.
So it looked like a move to the center for someone who's supposed to be this Tea Party favorite for broad appeal. And, that reminded me actually of Obama in 2008, in that he was the liberal candidate and he surfed the liberal wave, but he was really a center-left politician. And on foreign policy, Rubio even said that the divide between the left and the right is not as big as you might think. So
right.
you see this as maybe a pivot for Rubio to move to get ready for Romney in the general election, but I don't see it that way because again, if you look at the structure of the Obama administration, Joe Biden was brought in as he was supposed to be the foreign policy heavyweight. He was supposed to do a lot of foreign policy stuff, but Hillary Clinton is actually lauded as the one who's really handling the U.S. relations with the rest of the world well. And if Rubio wants to do this, if Rubio really wants to hold high office, I don't think being vice president is going to help him bone up on the issues he needs to. And he's really putting his electoral future in the hands of Mitt Romney. Because you're associated with that administration. And Romney needs the foreign policy experience, or he needs the foreign policy credibility, but truthfully, the vice president probably isn't going to be doing a lot of that.
Right. So it's interesting what you say. I found the speech, let's say this, it was interesting to me that he took more swings at the doves in his own party than anyone else.
Yeah.
And there's kind of been, and my old colleague and roommate and friend, W. James Antle III, Jim Antle, at the American Spectator, pointed out that there is this kind of Tea Party rivalry on foreign policy where Rand Paul is the dovish Tea Party senator and Marco Rubio is the hawkish one. I happen to think that there are these kind of two wings of the Tea Party, where one is more libertarian and anti-interventionist or isolationist, and then the other is more identified with a hawkish strain in the conservative movement that likes the assertion of American power. Now, in a kind of Jacksonian way. Now, Rubio takes it a step further because he talks about our values and the value of having free democratic societies in the Middle East. So what I saw in the speech, of course, was the return of the last decade's neoconservatism, which never went away. Mm-hmm. It's still the kind of regnant, as you said, it's not that far away from the center left. Joe Lieberman was the guy who introduced him. But I do feel like rhetorically, the neoconservatives, neoliberals, people who enjoy an assertive American foreign policy are, they always feel as it's funny in this way. Maybe it's their paranoid mindset. But they always feel that they are in much more jeopardy of being overwhelmed by the forces of isolation than they ever are. There's always an exaggerated threat that somehow the Ron Pauls of the world are going to take command of the ship of state and steer it into Pacific waters. Now that it never actually happens, much to my chagrin. But so I find that interesting. I did not like the speech at all.
Really?
For the content. For the content of it. I mean, I thought, there were rhetorical nods to internationalism when it suits us, but then not listening to the UN when it doesn't, which are fine. I guess I agree with that too in this kind of general theory. But Marco Rubio's definition of what is an American interest is everything is an American interest.
Right.
He basically said that anything that happens in these foreign countries can affect us, and that we won't be secure until the little hamlets in Afghanistan and Pakistan are secure. Which to me might as well say that, I made this comparison in a post on Business Insider, one of my rare editorial flights lately, that this is like saying that you cannot be sure that there will be food on your table tonight unless the United States federal government has eliminated world hunger.
Right.
It's just not reasonable. The two are not actually that related. The United States in the 19th century could exist with all sorts of genocides that were happening all over the planet. It can still do so today. It should trouble our conscience, sure, but to me, the analogy is that somehow, if we don't intervene in something, we've approved of it.
Right.
And to me, this is like saying that if I heard of a domestic dispute happening in North Carolina tonight, right?
Yeah.
Like, say somehow I heard this credible rumor from a friend living in North Carolina. Hey, I think my coworker is going to go home tonight and beat his wife. And it's just a suspicion. And, maybe okay, are you going to call the cops on him? Whatever. Okay, sure. But if I don't suddenly feel like the cops are doing enough, that suddenly it becomes incumbent on me to drive down there at great cost, take a gun, and put myself in the middle of that domestic dispute.
Right.
That is not a reasonable view of, that is not a moral view that makes sense in our lives, and it doesn't make sense on the international stage. At least that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I see that, and I don't want to get off Rubio too much here, but I think...
Right. I'm sorry if you're taking us a little bit off of Rubio into my own...
I think, his counter to that would be, his rationale, and I guess a big part of all of this was that the American presence in the world has to be increased, and we have to be everywhere, because we're it's that greatest country in the world, most powerful military in the world thing. And I guess the counter to that would be the difference between your example is that it does set, the U.S. reactions or non-actions to global events will always be interpreted as policy. While if I, don't, buy a gun because someone was shot in Boston, it doesn't say anything because I don't matter. And I think that is the counter argument to that. I don't think it's a very good one. I think, the thing about foreign policy is that, and he even said this in his speech, at the same time, we have to also let the rest of the world, police itself. So
Right.
it's, it is really confusing, and I just don't, I think I land with you on this, that the point of view is a little, it has some problems with it, some weaknesses.
It strikes me as just pious nonsense, except with guns. And so that's, I guess, what bothers me about it.
Well, going back to Rubio, though, I mean, was this a campaign speech? What was this? And do you,
Well,
what do you think of Dickerson's headline, which was Rubio's this cycle Sarah Palin, which I really disagree with, actually.
Okay, I would say I'll take those in order. I think it is a campaign speech in the sense of it benefits any senator to have your name out there being whispered as a potential vice presidential candidate, I think. It raises your profile nationally, gives you the chance. Rubio's gone around and campaigned with Mitt Romney, so he's, reached out and literally touched people in Pennsylvania. Those people could become potential donors or activists on a national level for him someday, even if not soon. So I think as a politician, your rational calculation is to encourage such talk. So if you can give a cool foreign policy speech and get some media to cover it while you're in the Veep speculation, all the better.
Yeah.
As for whether he'd be this year's Sarah Palin, I think it would be true if these persistent rumors that he really doesn't have his family history straight are true. I've not gone down to Florida to beat around the bushes and look at his confirmation slip from the local bishop or whatever. He used to tell a story about a date when his parents came over from Cuba. Turns out it wasn't that date.
Right.
There's been rumors, reports on BuzzFeed that temporarily his family converted to Mormonism, partly through his enthusiasm, and then converted back to Catholicism, again through his enthusiasm. It's kind of unclear whether he's a Catholic or an evangelical. He says he's Catholic, but he attends an evangelical church. Which, by the way, I think being mysteriously one in both is good, as it was for Rick Santorum. Good electorally.
Right.
Obviously, he's going to be damned to hell for this, but let him be anathema, as the Council of Trent says.
Right.
But
this is the other. Go on. Sorry.
No. So, but I think the thing about Palin was the combination of her background in Alaska, which is kind of this mysterious place that is, in a way, more American than America, in the sense of, it really is a frontier. There really are these riches. It's really teeming with, wildlife and seeming adventure. Half of our reality television shows are about people doing dangerous work in Alaska.
Yeah.
So the combination of Alaska, her attractive looks for a politician. I don't want to get into a debate about whether she's what did Tucker Carlson call her? Supreme Commander of Milfistan? She was hot,
right,
for a vice presidential pick,
right,
plus her lack of knowledge, so there was just huge excitement, interest, a huge ability of Americans to project onto her.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of symbolic things about her life that seemed larger than real life. And then there was the brutal interview with Katie Couric and the brutal takedowns on Saturday Night Live.
Right.
I don't think Marco Rubio has the volume turned up to 11 on any of those things the way Palin did.
Right.
They might be turned up to 2. And as far as I think he is, even if I think he's wrong about foreign policy, he does not come off as a total nincompoop,
Right. I think, I think that's the key here. Palin really represented this sort of anti-intellectualism and contempt for, knowing a lot. And what Rubio has demonstrated, at the very least, which I've noticed lately, is that he wants to learn and he wants to have these nuanced foreign policies. And that's a big difference between Palin and Rubio. It's a huge difference.
It is a huge difference. It also shows that there is this, American politics is complicated. So this Tea Party movement can be anti-intellectual in Sarah Palin's form, can be very populist that way. It can be intellectual in the sense of Rand Paul and Justin Amash, debating these really fine points. And Justin Amash is a freshman congressman who is like Ron Paul times 2. Having these really great debates about the Federalist Papers and how to interpret the Constitution. And, I remember Justin Amash once held up the bill on defunding NPR, which is something that all the Republicans voted for on a purely culture war basis. And he voted the other way because he's like, well, under the Constitution, this is an illegal bill of attainder. And so obviously I can't vote for it. Mm-hmm. So, there could be this almost nattering intellectual side of the Tea Party.
Right.
So it turns out the Tea Party is just as diverse as the conservative movement that is its step-parent.
Right.
I would say that. I don't think Romney will pick Marco Rubio, and I haven't decided who I think he will pick.
Really?
That's for another show. I haven't figured it out yet.
Right. I think the other important. Rubio also introduced this alternative to the DREAM Act, which is Dick Durbin's legislation for giving a path to citizenship for illegal immigrants who've gone to college and been in the U.S. for a long time. And Rubio's legislation, which he introduced this week, also basically does the same thing, except it doesn't provide them a path to citizenship. It just allows them to stay in the U.S. and keeps them from being deported. That's not what I expected, and that's not what the rumors said about Marco Rubio, that his immigration stance was farther to the right than a lot of the white guys in the Senate.
Right.
And this is why he reminds me a little bit of Obama, and I think he's selling himself short by if he's indulging in these VP rumors, and he's really considering it, because he, I think, is going to satiate what the GOP has been really hungry for since Obama came up on the scene, and which is that this young, really good-looking, really charming politician, and you can't deny that he's not any of these things, with nuanced policies. And
right.
he's moving to the center just in the same way that Obama did with, ride the left to gain prominence and then move a little bit to the center. I really think for Rubio, if he's patient and and he doesn't go too far with this, he's going to be in a much better position down the line. The last thing, the one thing I think where Rubio is very similar with Palin is his sensitivity to bad press in the media, which would hurt Romney. I mean, some of these rumors and scandals were very, very worrisome if I am Marco Rubio and personally bothersome to me. But the truth about a presidential campaign, especially now, is that you have to have that cool that Obama had and has. You can't stop the train to deal with every little, rumor and bad day of press. There are going to be bad cycles and there are going to be good ones, and you just got to stay the course, which is something that Romney and Obama have done very well. And I have serious doubts that, Rubio would be able to sufficiently just focus on the message and not freak out. And it's a very hard thing to do for anyone.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's all. I mean, yeah.
No, I agree with that. That's well said. Well, here's where I want to turn to something. If you are not a baseball fan, you can tune out now. And go to hell. And if you are a baseball fan and a decent American, stay tuned. So,
but not a Cubs fan, please. Just go away.
Oh, okay. So, how do I begin this? Let me say, when I was young, baseball was important to me. My grandmother, who lived in our house when I was young, was an enormous Mets fan. And this has been handed down generation to generation. My grandmother grew up in Brooklyn, was a Dodgers fan. My grandfather, same side, grew up in New York and was a Giants fan. Those teams left for California, and in their place, the blue and orange went to the Mets.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up and, would kick around the house and... then my grandmother would tell me to pay attention because Darryl Strawberry is coming up to bat.
Right.
And then she'd try to hide the New York Post or whatever, the stories about Mets players throwing fireworks at kids or whatever they were doing, and doing cocaine. As I became a teenager, I got into basketball, other things became more important in my life, writing, poetry, whatever, girls. And now as I've become an adult, baseball is becoming way more important to me. It was an unbelievable relief when the baseball season started this spring. And it's a weird cliche that a lot of political writers like baseball. It's actually something that Thomas Frank has made fun of. And I want to try to justify it, which is that baseball has this beautiful dynamic of tension and release. It has this wonderful balance between individual and team performance. Teams win, but everything that happens on the field can be evaluated on an individual level. And the central drama is a one-on-one battle between the pitcher and the hit batter. So I think it's the perfect game. And it's a perfect game because of what happened in the past week, which is that, again, a former Met cast-off pitcher, Phil Humber, who was actually a lot of people's cast-off, turned up on the White Sox and threw a perfect game. And I think it's only the 22nd perfect game ever thrown.
It's 21st. 22nd if you count this one in Detroit, which my college friends will be screaming at me about
Oh, the Galarraga one?
Yeah, the Galarraga one. But
where the ump got wrong-footed him on the last out. So the Mets have never even had a no-hitter, but Phil Humber, I think, becomes the 6th or the 7th former Met to throw either a no-hitter or a perfect game. And Phil Humber, I don't think, is a great pitcher, just like Galarraga isn't a great pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
But man, was it a good story. So as a White Sox fan who benefited from this deal,
yes,
tell me about Phil Humber's perfect game.
Well, here's the thing, actually. So Phil Humber came on the scene last year when Jake Peavy, who was supposed to be one of our big all-stars and was just supposed to go in and blow every game out and just strike out, was injured, which was a big problem and endemic for a lot of his career. And Humber did really well, and I was impressed. And so last weekend, I'm cooking baked macaroni, and I get an email from my friend John who says something's going to happen, and I tune in. I have to admit, I was not watching at the time, which is actually unusual for me. But, and Humber was getting close to a perfect game, and we were all tense, and this is, he's the 5th starter on the White Sox, and he was just brought up to a place to stand in, and he earned his chops and has stayed in the rotation. And I, have been very optimistic about him. So he gets to the 9th inning, he gets the last batter, he gets to a 3-2 count, so he's at 3 balls and 2 strikes, and he just, I think he was nervous, understandably, and the ball just lands on the ground. But the batter swings, and he checks his swing, and it's ruled a strike. He turns to the umpire to argue, and the catcher Brzezinski throws to first, and it's a perfect game. He's out. That's it. There was a little grumbling, but not very much about it. This is the second perfect game in the last 3 years for the White Sox. One was by Mark Burley in 2009. I'm going to get to that in a second. And I love it. The thing about being a White Sox fan is that a lot of the time you have players who come in or leave who do really well elsewhere or look really bad coming in and do really well with the White Sox. And this is part of the beauty of this game. A lot of people say it's boring, but this is why I love it too. It is not predictable. It's just matchups a lot of the time and circumstance. And sometimes it's just the beauty of the moment where everything clicks. And everything clicked for Phil Humber last weekend. They did not click last night, by the way, when he...
Right, no, he was awful last night.
Right. He was pitching last night, and the end score was 10-3. He had 5 strikeouts. But, this was the opposite of what we saw last weekend. I love it. I love that he's been plagued with injuries, and he had this moment. He's been doing pretty well. And I do feel your frustration, though, Michael, because, for instance, Nick Swisher on the Yankees was terrible with the White Sox, and he's doing really well with the Yankees.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. What I love about baseball, I love the boringness sometimes, actually. There is no better feeling. There's nothing more restful to me. It's like, come home from the things I do on, say, a Sunday morning, change, get a sandwich, a few chips, put on some baseball. There's going to be baseball on all day. Just take a nap, you can, there are sometimes these lazy games, especially in the dog days of summer or whatever, or when your team is out of it,
right,
that just stretch on in this kind of languorous and indulgent way. It's beautiful. And then you're watching a meaningless game, or what you think is a meaningless game, as I remember, what was it, 91? The Mets are way out of it. it's like the last game of the season. David Cohn is pitching, and then all of a sudden I'm watching. It's like, oh my gosh, he's got like 11 strikeouts in 5 innings. What is going on here? And all of a sudden it builds up to a 19 strikeout game, and suddenly you've seen something you've never seen before.
Yeah.
And then years later, I go to Cooperstown to visit the Hall of Fame, and there's the jersey he was wearing, or there was, one of the balls he used to pitch that game. And I almost wish, there's a lot of critique of to take this to a higher level, to explain maybe what this means. There is a lot of critique of our sporting culture in that, we're too obsessive over it, and it's bred in circuses to distract us.
Mm-hmm.
I say more circuses, frankly. We have fewer public feasts than traditional societies did, and I would rather we psychologists talk about sublimating the war instinct into sports. That's awesome. We should do that all the time. I love these rivalries. People got carried away, obviously, but I remember in 2003 and 2004 in these epic series between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees in the playoffs. I was on campus in Fordham. A lot of kids from Boston at Fordham in the Bronx, home of the Yankees. And there were fights that would break out, which is awesome. I'm just going to say it. It was fun to watch. It was. No one got really hurt. And classes were sometimes canceled because they'd be like, well, it's game 7 and Pedro's pitching against the Yankees. Winner's going to go to the World Series. Obviously, no one's going to come to class, so don't come to class. And it gives us a form of civic participation that isn't the government, that isn't as contentious as religion, that the contentiousness in it has this kind of inbuilt respect. A Red Sox fan understands a Yankees fan in a way that warring countries refuse to understand each other. I say more circuses if it's baseball, and even playoff hockey, which I was enjoying last night.
Really?
Suffering through. Yeah, I'm a Devils fan, and the night before we recorded this, they won a double overtime Game 7 elimination.
Who was that against?
It was against the Florida Panthers.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, to wax on another sport for a second, baseball is this beautiful ballet of tension and release and build-up, and it's beautiful that it doesn't have a clock.
Mm-hmm.
Hockey is the best sport as far as a clock, because unlike basketball, which just slows down inevitably as teams strategize about how to foul the other team and stop the action in hockey in a Game 7 overtime is relentless. It is gripping. It is, you just feel, we were talking about this in the office today, you just feel sick to your stomach every second that the opposing team has possession of the puck.
Right.
So I'd love to see hockey become more popular too. I'm for the circuses, and I'm for more of them. I want people to get into minor league baseball if they have a local team.
I hear minor league. I haven't gone to a game, but I hear minor league is a lot of fun. Actually,
it is fun. Sometimes it's a little unprofessional because it's minor league, and I mean that both for what takes place on the field, and then also, I remember I went to a Hudson Valley Renegades game, which was at the time I think a single A affiliate of the Tampa Bay Rays.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, they have those slingshots where they can slingshot like a T-shirt or something.
A slingshot a T-shirt.
Yeah, like the the people that are supposed to warm up the crowd. I remember one of my good friends that night. I guess this girl messed up with the slingshot a little bit, and she ended up pelting him directly in the face when he was about 5 feet in front of her, and ended up with like a bloody nose. And some other kid ran up and got the T-shirt.
That's the hazard of going to a game and trying to catch a foul ball. It's coming at you.
It is. It is. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
So, I agree with you on all this, but the knock I hear most on baseball, which I don't agree with at all, is that it's so slow and boring.
It's the beauty of it.
Yeah, it hurts me to hear that because you just have to know the context of the game, and there's nothing more fun to me in sports than watching a good pitcher on his game and just throw it. You really just savor the moment. There's a lot of tension there. How do you respond to like a football fan who says that? And and then and I just want to mention one more thing.
All right, I will say this. Fan. I'll say this to the football fan, which is that baseball is exciting. Football is exciting on football terms, right? So an outsider to football would say, and when they take the game over to London once a year, I think a lot of the people over there say this. They're like, why is this such an enormous sport? We don't get it. There's stoppage of play every play. There's no continuous action. They were almost expecting it to be like Australian rules football or rugby. So there's all this stopping the action. They don't get it. But once you get football on its own terms, that there's this strategy, how the strategy is executed on each down, how the coaches and players are interacting, how the players interact, how the lines work.
Right. It's a complicated
then it becomes really good. So baseball works that way too. It's exciting on its own terms, and it's beautiful on its own terms as well. And it literally is just immersing yourself in it enough to begin to care.
Right.
Right. And I don't think there's a way of arguing someone into this. I think it is something that must be learned with the heart, and it's only learned through presence, and that's done by watching or going to a game.
I never played baseball when I was young. I really wish I had, but it's really, it's helped me and my dad bond as we get older, and it's something like we'll talk about politics, and then we'll talk about the White Sox, and we'll grumble or we'll say this is good, and it's it's a nice sort of tonic in that it's something to care about, but it's not as depressing as politics can be a lot of the time.
This is exactly right too. I'm very close with friends from high school, partly because I married a girl from high school.
Yeah.
So our social network ended up staying relatively similar. But because, my friends and I have changed over time. Like, I went from being this mischievous guy, like arty guy, to being this like religious, political guy. And, my friend who's really super funny and talented and a performer guy became a court officer. And, another guy who works at his parents' liquor store. And what do we have? We have the Mets. Like, we still have that. We would not, if we met today, probably become friends. Just be like, well, this person's interested in different things. Maybe we wouldn't get along.
Right.
Because we wouldn't be in the same social circle.
Right.
But we had this contact. We have this shared interest, and we're still exchanging emails. We're still playing in fantasy leagues together. We still occasionally go to a game. And it's the same thing, with other family members. My wife's uncle and I are enormous Mets fans, so we can talk about that. One of her parents' best friends is a huge Yankees fan, so we could just talk the way rivals talk.
Right.
It is something I actually think sports elevates our culture rather than denigrates it.
Well,
and maybe
yeah,
that's
because
just,
it's
maybe
the
that's
only
self-justifying.
sport that, like the millionaire and the valet it's the only thing that the millionaire and the valet can, like, easily talk about on the same ground as spectators who follow it. And it is, I guess, at least in American culture, I think, the only true meritocracy, which is that if you're good enough, regardless of skin color or background, you're going to do well, and you're going to be pursued, and you're going to be revered.
Yeah.
Let me go on.
And I caution people, though. One thing I'm against, and I've written this somewhere, and I'll write it again. I don't like it when it's turned into a religion, like the way I feel Ken Burns has done.
Yeah.
Where baseball explains everything about America, the civil rights movement, and everything else. It is a game, but humans like to play, and we like to watch when it's played well. So that's what makes it good. And yes, there are all these other stories, about Jackie Robinson and the Dodgers, about Hispanic players, Asian players moving into the game that are great, but it's not a social experiment. It is a game, and it reflects the good and the bad.
Right, but don't you think also that there's something, like with Humber's story, there's something very comforting about that in sort of the cliched American dream thing? I mean, this is a guy who was out for a long time, and then he had this great moment, and he will forever be remembered for that.
Oh, I like it because it has this. It's not just a meritocracy; it's an aristocracy of talent, and it has. The one thing I've been troubled by in recent years is that some, and I love all the sabermetrics guys.
Yeah.
What I don't like is when they become. When they turn the game into mere statistics, when they literally refuse to see stories and narrative,
Right.
because they're so suspicious that will lead them away from the pure algorithm that the sport is.
Right.
I don't think the sport is an algorithm. It's derived. Those algorithms are derived from human action, human interest, human stories. So yeah, I'm against baseball as a religion. I am for it as narrative and story and human drama.
Right. I want to ask you something as a White Sox fan, and I want to premise this by saying that I am far more sympathetic to the Mets. My friend Rachel is a Mets fan. I cheered for them in 2006 when they were doing really well.
Yep.
And I see the Yankees as the evil empire. I think in Chicago, as a White Sox fan, I'm proud to say that I think we're more the evil empire. But Mark Burley, this pitcher, the star pitcher who until recently was a White Sox fan favorite, he was an institution. When he had this perfect game, right afterwards, President Obama called him. Like, it was 45 minutes or something. Obama happened to be in the Midwest, in like Iowa, and he just called Burley to congratulate him. And everybody loved it at the time. In Chicago, it was just like, for every Chicago Democrat, it was the best time ever, Obama's officially a White Sox fan. I think he's more into basketball, actually, than he is baseball.
I think so too.
This time around, and some of my politically minded Chicago White Sox friends noted this, and I reported on the Obama call. It took Obama like 2 or 3 days to call Phil Humber. And Phil Humber, I don't think this has anything to do with it at all. But Phil Humber joked that he wondered if he knew if Obama knew that he's a registered Republican. But why do you think that White Sox fans who follow politics a lot, are so like noticed that, picked up on that in particular. It was weird.
I think it's just the obsession of politics infecting the pure sport of the game. I just think it's the same impetus that causes people to look at every utterance of the president as a potential slight on them or a potential praise for their enemies. Makes it like an infection when the president is involved in anything. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to it. I mean, it's just. We
should probably be more comforted because he was probably doing things like running the country.
Yes, exactly. Well, on that note,
I want to. In closing. You mentioned like your school days, and I can't peg you because you've talked about fronting, and then you're writing poetry and all this stuff. Who were you, Michael? Anyway,
who is the real Michael Brandon Dougherty?
Right.
When will the New York Times ombudsman ask that?
I guess we'll just have to keep watching Washington Squares to find out.
That's
right.
See what
I did right there? You like that?
It's good. Yeah, subscribe above. Buttons. All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. Have a good weekend, and we will talk again soon.
I hope so. Talk to you later.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.